2. What happened to the Councillor of Justice? It was getting late when Councillor Knapp decided to go home, lost in thought about the good old days of King Hans. As fate would have it, he put on a Galoshes of Fortune instead of his own and wore them out into East Street. But the power that lay in the galoshes took him back to into the reign of King Hans, and as the streets were not paved in those days, his feet sank deep into the mud and the mire. "Why, how deplorable," the Councillor of Justice said. "The whole sidewalk is gone and all the street lights are out." As the moon had not yet risen high enough and the air was somewhat foggy, everything around him was dark and blurred. At the next corner, a lantern hung before an image of the Madonna, but for all the light it afforded him, it might as well not have been there. Only when he stood directly under it did he make out the painting of the mother and a child. It's probably an art museum, he thought, and they have forgotten to take in the sign. 2 people in medieval costumes passed by. "How strange they looked," he said. "They must have been to a masquerade." Just then the sound of drums and fifes came his way and bright torches flared. The Councillor of Justice stopped and was startled to see an old procession go past, led by a whole band of drummers who were dexterously drumming away. These were followed by soldiers armed with long bows and crossbows. The chief personage of the procession was a churchman of rank. The astounded councillor asked what all this meant and who that man might be. "That is the Bishop of Sealand," he was told. What in the name of heaven can have come over the bishop, the Councillor of Justice wondered. He sighed and shook his head. The bishop? Impossible. Still pondering about it without glancing to the right or left, he kept on down East Street and across High Bridge Square. The bridge that led from there to Palace Square was not to be found at all. At last, on the bank of the shallow stream, he saw a boat with 2 men in it. "Would the gentleman want to be ferried over to the home?" they asked him. "To the home?" blurted the councillor, who had not the faintest notion that he was living in another age. "I want to go to Christian's Harbor on Little Market Street." The men gaped at him. "Kindly tell me where the bridge is," he said. "It's disgraceful that all the street lamps are out. And besides, it's as muddy to walk here as in a swamp." But the more he talked to the boatmen, the less they understood each other. "I can't understand your jabbering Bolmholm accent," he finally said, and angrily turned his back on them. But no bridge could he find. Even the fence was gone. "What a scandalous state of affairs! What a way for things to look," he said. Never had he been so disgruntled with his own age as he was this evening. "I think I'd better take a cab." But where were the cabs? There were none in sight. "I'll have to go back to King's Newmarket where there is a cab stand, or I shall never reach Christian's Harbor." To back he trudged to East Street and had nearly walked the length of it when the moon rose. "Good heavens, what have they been building here?" he cried as he beheld the East Gate, which in the old days stood at the end of East Street. In time, however, he found a gate through which he passed into what is now Newmarket, but all he saw there was a large meadow. A few bushes rose here and there, and the meadow was divided by a wide canal or stream. The few wretched wooden huts on the far shore belonged to Dutch sailors, so at the time the place was called Dutch Meadow. "Either I'm seeing what is called Fata Morgana, or I'm drunk," the Councillor of Justice moaned. "What sort of place is this? Where am I?" He turned back, convinced that he must be a very ill man. As he walked through the street again, he paid more attention to the houses. Most of them were of wood, and many were thatched with straw. "No, I don't feel myself at all," he complained. "I only took 1 glass of punch, but it doesn't agree with me. The idea of serving punch with hot salmon! I'll speak about it severely to our hostess, the agent's wife. Shall I march straight back and tell her how I feel?" "No, that would be in bad taste. And besides, I doubt whether her household is still awake." He searched for the house but wasn't able to find it. "This is terrible," he cried. "I don't even recognize East Street. There's not a shop to be seen. Wretched old ramshackle huts are all I see, as if I were in Roskilde or Ringstead. Oh, but I'm ill. There's no point in standing on ceremony, but where on earth is the agent's house? This hut doesn't look remotely like it, but I can hear that people inside are still awake. I'm indeed a very sick man." He reached a half-open door where light flickered through the crack. It was a tavern of that period, a sort of ale-house. The room had the look of a farmer's clay-floored kitchen in Holstein, and the people who sat there were sailors, citizens of Copenhagen, and a couple of scholars, deep in conversation over their mugs. They paid little attention to the newcomer. "Pardon me," the Councillor of Justice said to the landlady who came toward him, "but I am far from well. Would you send someone for a cab to take me to Christian's Harbor?" The woman stared at him, shook her head, and addressed him in German. As the Councillor of Justice supposed that she could not speak Danish, he repeated his remarks in German. This and the cut of his clothes convinced the woman that he was a foreigner. She soon understood that he felt unwell and fetched him a mug of water. Decidedly brackish, for she drew it directly from the sea level well outside, the Councillor put his head in his hands and took a deep breath and thought over all of the queer things that surrounded him. "Is that tonight's number of the day?" he remarked from force of habit as he saw the woman putting away a large folded sheet. Without quite understanding him, she handed him the paper. It was a woodcut representing a meteor seen in the skies over Cologne. "This is very old," said the Councillor, who became quite enthusiastic about his discovery. "Where did you get this rare old print? It's most interesting, although of course the whole matter is a myth. In this day and age, such meteors are explained away as a manifestation of the northern lights, probably caused by electricity." Those who sat near him heard the remark and looked at him in astonishment. One of them rose, respectfully doffed his hat, and said with the utmost gravity, "Sir, you must be a great scholar." "Not at all," replied the Councillor. "I merely have a word or two to say about things that everyone should know." "Modestia is an admirable virtue," the man declared. "In regard to your statement, I must say, mehe secus videtur, though I shall be happy to suspend my judicium." "May I ask whom I have the pleasure of addressing?" the Councillor of Justice inquired. "I am a bachelor of theology," the old man told him in Latin. This answer satisfied the Councillor of Justice, for the degree was in harmony with the fellow's way of dressing. "Obviously," he thought, "this is some old village schoolmaster, an odd character such as one still comes across now and then up in Jutland. This is scarcely a locus docendi," the man continued. "But I entreat you to favor us with your conversation. You, of course, are well read in the classics." "Oh, more or less," the Councillor agreed. "I like to read the standard old books and the new ones too, except for those everyday stories of which we have had enough in reality." "Everyday stories?" our bachelor asked. "Yes, I mean these modern novels." "Oh," the man said with a smile. "Still, they are very clever, and are popular with the court. King Hans is particularly fond of The Romance of Iwan and Jaiwan, which deals with King Arthur and his Knights of the Round Table. The king has been known to jest with the lords about it." "Well," said the Councillor, "one can't keep up with all the new books. I suppose it has just been published by Heiberg." "No," the man said, "not by Heiberg, but by Gottfried von Gimmen." "Indeed, what a fine old name for a literary man. Why, Gottfried von Gimmen was the first printer in Denmark." "Yes," the man agreed, "he is our first and foremost printer." Thus far their conversation had flowed quite smoothly. Now one of the townsmen began to talk about the pestilence that had raged some years back, meaning the plague of 1484. The Councillor understood him to mean the last epidemic of cholera, so they agreed well enough. The Freebooters' War of 1490 was so recent that it could not be passed over. The English raiders had taken ships from our harbor, they said, and the Councillor of Justice, who was well posted on the affair of 1801, manfully helped them to abuse the English. After that, however, the talk floundered from one contradiction to another. The worthy bachelor was so completely unenlightened that the Councillor's most commonplace remarks struck him as being too daring and too fantastic. They stared at each other. When they reached an impasse, the bachelor broke into Latin in the hope that he would be better understood, but that didn't help. The landlady plucked at the Councillor's sleeve and asked him, "How do you feel now?" This forcibly recalled to him all of the things that he had happily forgotten in the heat of this conversation. "Merciful heaven, where am I?" he wondered, and the thought made him dizzy. "We will drink claret wine and mead and Bremen beer," one of the guests cried out, "and you shall drink with us." Two girls came in, and one of them wore a cap of two colors. They filled the glasses and made curtsies. The counselor felt cold shivers up and down his spine. "What is all this? What is all this?" he groaned, but drink with them he must. They overwhelmed him with their kind intentions until he despaired, and when one man pronounced him drunk, he didn't doubt it in the least. All he asked was that they get him a drogsk. And they thought he was speaking in Russian. Never before had he been in such low and vulgar company. One would think that the country had lapsed back into barbarism, he told himself. This is the most dreadful moment of my life. Then it occurred to him to slip down under the table, crawl to the door, and try to sneak out. But just as he neared the threshold, his companions discovered him and tried to pull him out by his feet. However, by great good luck, they pulled off his galoshes and with them the whole enchantment. The Councillor of Justice now distinctly saw a street lamp burning in front of a large building. He knew the building and the other buildings nearby. It was East Street, as we know it today. He lay on the pavement with his legs against a gate, and across the way a night watchman sat fast asleep. "Merciful heavens, have I been lying here in the street dreaming?" the Councillor of Justice said. "To be sure, this is East Street. How blessedly bright and how colorful it looks. But what dreadful effect that one glass of punch must have had on me." 2 minutes later, he was seated in a cab and well on his way to Christian's Harbor. As he recalled all the past terror and distress to which he had been subjected, he wholeheartedly approved of the present, our own happy age. With all its shortcomings, it was far preferable to that age into which he had recently stumbled. And that, thought the Councillor of Justice, was good common sense.